The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across Willow Creek as Bethany Foster stood on the wooden platform of the train station, her scarred hands trembling as she clutched her worn leather satchel. It was 1876, and the dusty frontier town represented her last chance at a new beginning, one she desperately needed, but feared she didn't deserve. The journey west had drained what little money Bethany had left after the fire that claimed her family's Pennsylvania farm and left half her body marked with burns. Her once soft skin now bore the mottled evidence of that terrible night, a permanent reminder that extended from her right shoulder down to her wrist, with smaller scars marring the right side of her neck and jawline. Bethany stepped off the platform, wincing as her boots hit the dirt. 3 days on the train had left her stiff and sore, but she couldn't afford to rest yet. She needed work and lodging before nightfall. The letter in her pocket promised both a position as a schoolteacher that included a small cabin on the outskirts of town. It seemed too good to be true for a woman with her past and her scars, but the town's urgent need for education had apparently outweighed any misgivings about hiring a teacher sight unseen. Miss Foster, a stern-faced older woman, approached, her gray hair pulled back in a severe bun. "I'm Martha Willoughby, head of the town council." Bethany straightened her posture, fighting the urge to raise her hand to cover the right side of her face. "Yes, madam. Thank you for meeting me." Martha's eyes flickered briefly to Bethany's scars before returning to meet her gaze. "The position is yours as discussed in our correspondence, provided you can start Monday. The cabin needs work, but it's yours rent-free as part of your compensation." "I'm grateful for the opportunity," Bethany replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. She'd grown accustomed to the quick glances, the silent assessments, the poorly hidden pity or revulsion. Martha nodded briskly. "James Turner will show you to the property. He's done some repairs already, but you'll want to speak with him about what else needs attention." She turned and gestured to a tall man leaning against a post several yards away. Bethany's breath caught as he pushed away from his position and strode toward them. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to hard work and open spaces. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat. "Jake, this is Miss Foster, our new schoolteacher," Martha said. "Miss Foster, Jake Turner owns the largest ranch outside town and sits on the council. He's been overseeing the repairs on your cabin." Jake removed his hat, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. "Madam," he said with a nod, his blue eyes meeting hers without flinching away from her scars. "Welcome to Willow Creek." "Thank you, Mr. Turner," Bethany replied, fighting to keep her voice even. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her directly, without that telltale flicker of discomfort. "I've got my wagon out front," he said, gesturing toward the street. "I can take you and your belongings to the cabin now, if you'd like. That would be most appreciated." Martha handed Bethany a small envelope. "Here's an advance on your first month's salary. Get yourself settled, and we'll speak more tomorrow about the school and your duties." As Martha walked away, Jake picked up Bethany's trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Is this all you've brought, Miss Foster?" "Yes," she said simply. What remained of her life fit into one trunk and the satchel in her hand. The fire had taken everything else. They walked to his wagon in silence. Bethany could feel curious eyes following them as they made their way down the main street. Willow Creek wasn't large, perhaps 40 buildings arranged along a dusty thoroughfare, but it was busy with the days and activities. Men filed out of the saloon while shopkeepers closed up for the evening. Women gathered children in parcels, stealing glances at the stranger accompanying Jake Turner. He helped her onto the wagon seat, his strong hands careful but impersonal as he steadied her. The touch, brief as it was, sent an unexpected flutter through her stomach. It had been so long since anyone had touched her without clinical necessity. "The cabin's about a mile outside town," Jake explained as he flicked the reins to set the horses in motion. "It's not much, but it's sturdy. I've fixed the roof and replaced some floorboards. The stove works fine. I'm sure it will be more than adequate," Bethany replied, keeping her gaze forward. "I don't require much." Jake glanced at her profile, his expression unreadable. "Town's been without a teacher for nearly 8 months. The last one left to get married in Denver." "I won't be leaving to get married," Bethany said, more sharply than she'd intended. A small smile touched Jake's lips. No plans to be swept off your feet by some charming cowboy then? Bethany stiffened. No, Mr. Turner. Those days are behind me. His smile faded, and they rode in silence for several minutes. Bethany took in the landscape, rolling hills covered in grass that had turned golden in the late summer heat, dotted with scrubby trees and the occasional outcropping of rock. In the distance, mountains rose against the darkening sky. It's beautiful country, she said finally. Jake nodded. Gets in your blood. Been here 10 years now. Can't imagine being anywhere else. He pointed to the northeast. My ranch is about 5 miles that way. Got nearly 2,000 acres and 300 head of cattle. Started with just 20 acres and 12 cows. You've done well for yourself. Been lucky, he said with a shrug. And stubborn. The wagon turned onto a narrow track that wound through a stand of cottonwood trees. Beyond them, Bethany could see a small cabin nestled against the hillside, smoke rising from its chimney. Someone's there, she said, alarmed. That'll be Mrs. Perkins. She's been getting the place ready, stocking the pantry, making sure there's hot water for you after your journey. Bethany hadn't expected such consideration. That's very kind. We take care of our own here, Jake said simply. And we're hoping you'll become one of us. The cabin was small but solid, with a front porch that faced west toward the mountains. An older woman emerged as they approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Right on time, she called. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread cooling. Jake helped Bethany down from the wagon. Miss Foster, this is Ida Perkins. Best cook in the county and nosiest neighbor you'll ever have. Ida swatted his arm. Pay him no mind, dear. I'm just curious, not nosy. Her eyes widened slightly at the sight of Bethany's scars, but her smile never faltered. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted. The cabin's interior was simple but clean. A main room with an iron stove, a small wooden table with 2 chairs, a rocking chair by the stone fireplace, and a narrow bed in the corner. A curtain partially concealed a washstand with a mirror above it. The floors were rough-hewn pine, recently swept, with a braided rug adding a touch of color. There's a root cellar out back with preserves and potatoes, Ida explained, ladling stew into a bowl. And Jake's brought firewood enough for a month. Privy's behind the cabin, and there's a good well just 20 yards to the east. It's perfect, Bethany said, meaning it. After months of uncertainty and transient lodgings, the little cabin felt like a sanctuary. I'll bring your trunk in, Jake said, stepping back outside. Ida lowered her voice. He's a good man, our Jake. Lost his wife in childbirth 7 years ago. Hasn't looked at another woman since, though not for lack of willing candidates. Bethany didn't respond. She wasn't interested in Jake Turner's past or his romantic prospects. She hadn't come to Willow Creek for anything but a quiet life and honest work. Jake returned with her trunk, setting it at the foot of the bed. I'll be by tomorrow to fix that loose step on the porch, he said, and to bring you to town to meet the school board proper. I can find my way, Bethany replied. His eyes met hers, steady and clear. I'm sure you can, Miss Foster. But my wagon's more comfortable than walking, and I'm headed that way anyhow. She couldn't argue with his logic. Very well. Thank you, Mr. Turner. After Jake and Ida left, Bethany sat at the table, eating the hearty stew and allowing herself to feel cautiously optimistic. The cabin was far better than she'd expected, and the people of Willow Creek seemed welcoming despite her appearance. Later, as she prepared for bed, Bethany caught her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. In the dim lamplight, the scars seemed less pronounced, but she knew they were there, a permanent reminder of all she had lost. She gently touched the puckered skin along her jawline, then dropped her hand. This is your life now, she whispered to herself. Make it count. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the cabin's east-facing window. Bethany had slept better than she had in months, lulled by the profound silence of the countryside. She dressed carefully in her best navy blue skirt and white shirtwaist, pinning her honey-brown hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. Jake arrived promptly at 9, as promised. He wore clean clothes and had trimmed his beard, though his tan Stetson showed the wear of many seasons. Morning, Miss Foster, he called from the wagon. Ready to meet your new pupil's parents? Bethany stepped outside, securing her modest straw hat with a pin. As ready as I'll ever be. The ride to town gave her a better view of Willow Creek in daylight. It was larger than she'd initially thought, with a church, a schoolhouse, several stores, 2 saloons, and a variety of homes ranging from substantial 2-story buildings to modest cabins. "How many students will I have?" she asked as they approached the center of town. 27 at last count, Jake replied. "Ages 6 to 16. Good kids mostly, though the Watson boys might test your patience. I'm not easily intimidated by unruly children, Mr. Turner." He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his serious face. "I don't imagine you're easily intimidated by much of anything, Miss Foster." The school board meeting went better than Bethany had dared hope. The 6 members, including Martha Willoughby and Jake, asked thoughtful questions about her teaching methods and experience. If they had reservations about her appearance, they kept them to themselves. "School starts Monday," Martha concluded. "Jake will help you prepare the classroom. We have books and supplies, though not as many as you might like." "I'll make do," Bethany assured her. It was a phrase that had become her personal motto over the past year. After the meeting, Jake showed her to the schoolhouse, a simple white building with a small bell tower. Inside were rows of desks, a larger desk for the teacher, a blackboard, and bookshelves with a modest collection of worn texts. "It's not fancy," Jake said, watching her examine the space. "It doesn't need to be fancy to be effective," Bethany replied. She ran her hand along the teacher's desk, imagining herself standing before a classroom again. Teaching had been her calling since she was a girl, and the fire hadn't changed that. Jake cleared his throat. "I thought you might like to see the rest of the town, meet some folks. The general store owner's wife has 3 children who'll be your students." Bethany hesitated. The idea of walking through town, feeling eyes on her scars, made her stomach clench. But she couldn't hide forever. "That would be helpful," she agreed. Their tour of Willow Creek took most of the afternoon. Jake introduced her to shopkeepers, ranchers in town for supplies, and several mothers with school-age children. Some couldn't hide their initial shock at her appearance, but most were welcoming, clearly more interested in her abilities as a teacher than her scars. By late afternoon, Bethany was exhausted from the constant interaction and the effort of maintaining her composure under scrutiny. When Jake suggested they stop at the hotel restaurant for a meal before heading back to her cabin, she almost declined. "You need to eat," he said simply, noting her hesitation. "And Ruth makes the best apple pie in the territory." The restaurant was busy, but not crowded. Jake led her to a table near the back, partially shielded by a large potted plant. She appreciated his consideration without him having to mention it. They had just received their food when a boisterous group of men entered. Their loud laughter and unsteady movements suggested they'd already visited one of the town's saloons. "Cattle buyers," Jake explained quietly. "In town for the autumn sales. They'll move on in a few days." Bethany nodded, keeping her gaze on her plate. She'd nearly finished eating when one of the men approached their table. "Well now, Jake Turner," the man said, his voice too loud. "Didn't expect to see you dining with a lady. Thought you'd sworn off women altogether." Jake's expression hardened. "Evening, Hank. Miss Foster is our new schoolteacher." "Miss Foster, this is Hank Bradley, a cattle buyer from Kansas City." Hank turned his attention to Bethany, his smile freezing as he took in her scarred face. "My apologies, miss. Didn't mean to interrupt your meal." "No apology necessary," Bethany said stiffly. Hank retreated to his companions, and Bethany could hear their muttered comments and snickers. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. "Ignore them," Jake said quietly. "They're not worth your attention. I'm accustomed to such reactions, Mr. Turner." His jaw tightened. "That doesn't make it right." They finished their meal in uncomfortable silence. As they left the restaurant, Hank called out, "Hey, Turner, didn't figure you for a man with such particular tastes." Jake stopped abruptly. Bethany grabbed his arm. "Please don't," she whispered. "It will only make things worse." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back to her face. After a moment, he nodded and continued toward the door. Outside, the western sky blazed with sunset colors. Jake helped Bethany into the wagon, his movements controlled but tense. They were halfway to her cabin before he spoke. "I apologize for Hank's behavior. He's always been a fool, but that's no excuse." "You have nothing to apologize for," Bethany said. "And I meant what I said. I'm accustomed to such reactions." Jake glanced at her. "How did it happen, if you don't mind my asking?" Bethany was silent for so long that Jake must have thought she wouldn't answer. Finally, she said, There was a fire at my family's farm in Pennsylvania. I tried to save my parents, but she shook her head. They didn't survive. I'm sorry, Jake said softly. As am I. She folded her hands in her lap. The doctor said I was fortunate. The burns could have been much worse. Must have been painful. Yes, she acknowledged. The memory of those weeks of agony still haunted her dreams. But physical pain eventually ends. It's the other kinds that linger. At her cabin, Jake insisted on checking the stove and adding more wood to her pile before leaving. I'll come by tomorrow to fix that step, he said as he prepared to depart. There's no need to trouble yourself, Bethany replied. I'm perfectly capable. I know you are, he interrupted gently. But I promised I would, and I keep my promises. She watched his wagon disappear down the track before going inside, oddly unsettled by his persistent kindness. The next day, Jake arrived mid-morning with tools and lumber. He worked on the step while Bethany prepared lesson plans at her table. The door opened to the pleasant autumn air. Do you mind if I ask you something? Jake said as he measured a piece of wood. Bethany looked up from her papers. That depends on the question. How old are you, Miss Foster? She blinked, surprised. I'm 24. Why do you ask? He shrugged, focusing on his work. Just curious. You seem older sometimes, in the way you carry yourself. I suppose I've had cause to grow up quickly, she said. Jake nodded as if that made perfect sense. I was 26 when Sarah died. Felt like I aged a decade that day. Bethany set down her pen. Mrs. Perkins mentioned you lost your wife. In childbirth. Her and the baby both. His hands stilled on the wood. Doctor said there was nothing to be done. She was just too small, and the baby was positioned wrong. I'm sorry for your loss, Bethany said quietly. He looked up at her, his blue eyes reflecting old pain. Time passes. The sharp edges of grief wear down eventually, but never disappear entirely. No, he agreed. Not entirely. They worked in companionable silence after that, each absorbed in their own tasks. When Jake finished repairing the step, he stayed to fix a loose window shutter and a leak in the roof that Bethany hadn't even noticed. As he was packing up his tools, he said casually, Church picnic on Sunday after services. Whole town will be there. You should come. Bethany hesitated. I'm not sure that would be wise. I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable. Jake's expression hardened slightly. Anyone who'd be uncomfortable doesn't matter. The decent folks, the ones whose children you'll be teaching, they'll welcome you. Perhaps, she allowed. But I think I'll wait for a quieter opportunity to meet the parents. He studied her for a moment. You're hiding out here. I'm not hiding. I'm being practical. Same thing sometimes. Jake put on his hat. Think about it. My sister Rebecca will be disappointed if you don't come. She's been talking about meeting the new teacher all week. After he left, Bethany tried to return to her lesson plans, but concentration eluded her. Jake's accusation that she was hiding bothered her more than it should have. Was she hiding? Or just protecting herself from inevitable hurt? Monday arrived, bringing with it Bethany's first day of teaching. She rose before dawn, dressed carefully in her most professional attire, and walked to the schoolhouse in the gray light of early morning. The room felt different with 27 students filling the desks. Their curious gazes followed her as she introduced herself, some openly staring at her scars, while others politely pretended not to notice. By mid-morning, the novelty had worn off, and they were focused on their lessons rather than their teacher's appearance. During the lunch break, as the children ate in the schoolyard, a young girl of about 8 approached Bethany shyly. Miss Foster? I'm Emma Turner. Bethany smiled. Are you Mr. Turner's daughter? Emma shook her head, her brown braids swinging. He's my uncle. My pa is his brother. Uncle Jake said I should tell you if anyone says mean things about your face, but nobody has. Billy Watson said you must be real brave. Bethany's throat tightened unexpectedly. That was kind of Billy. And your uncle? Emma nodded solemnly. Uncle Jake says brave is better than pretty anyway. Your uncle seems like a wise man. He's the best, Emma said with the certainty of childhood, even if he is lonely sometimes. The school day ended successfully, with the children filing out chattering excitedly about their new teacher and the books she'd promised to read to them. Bethany was gathering her things when a shadow fell across her desk. How'd it go? Jake asked, leaning against the doorframe. Quite well, I think, she replied, surprised to see him. Your niece is charming. He smiled. Emma's a good kid. Her ma spoils her something terrible, but she's got a kind heart. She said something interesting today. She told me you said brave is better than pretty. Jake's smile faded slightly. I might have mentioned something like that. Why would you do that? He met her gaze steadily. Because it's true, and because I wanted her to see what matters. Bethany looked away first, uncomfortable with the intensity in his blue eyes. Well, I appreciate the sentiment, however misguided. Misguided? His eyebrows rose. Children will always notice differences, Mr. Turner. Pretending otherwise doesn't help them or me. He pushed away from the doorframe and approached her desk. I wasn't pretending anything. I was teaching my niece to value strength of character over appearance. Seems like a lesson more folks could stand to learn. Bethany gathered her papers with hands that weren't quite steady. Perhaps. But I found that most people prefer not to be challenged in their comfortable assumptions. I'm not most people, Jake said quietly. No, she agreed, glancing up at him. I'm beginning to realize that. The weeks passed, settling into a rhythm as autumn deepened toward winter. Bethany found unexpected joy in teaching again, watching her students progress and gradually earning their trust. The parents, too, began to accept her, stopping by after school to discuss their children's education or inviting her to Sunday dinners. Jake remained a constant, if somewhat puzzling, presence in her life. He appeared regularly to check on her cabin, bring firewood, or simply to talk. Sometimes he brought books from his personal library, dog-eared volumes of poetry or history that revealed a thoughtful mind behind his rugged exterior. One evening in late October, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Jake arrived with a small crate of apples and a troubled expression. Is something wrong? Bethany asked, taking the apples and setting them on her table. Hank Bradley's back in town, Jake said. Thought you should know. Bethany stiffened. I see. Well, I doubt our paths will cross. He's staying a week, buying cattle to drive south before winter sets in. Jake removed his hat, turning it in his hands. He's been drinking at the Silver Dollar, running his mouth. About me? Jake's silence was answer enough. Bethany sighed. Mr. Turner, Jake, I appreciate your concern, but I've dealt with worse than a drunken cattle buyer's opinions. You shouldn't have to, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. Perhaps not, but that's the reality of my situation. She gestured to her scars. This is what I am now. No, Jake said sharply. It's part of you, not all of you. The vehemence in his voice startled her. Why do you care so much? He looked away, his profile strong against the fading light from the window. Because no one should be judged by their scars, visible or invisible. There was something in his tone, some deep-seated pain, that made Bethany wonder what invisible scars he carried beyond the loss of his wife. Will you come to the Harvest Festival next weekend? He asked, changing the subject. The whole town turns out. There's music, dancing, food enough to feed an army. The thought of being surrounded by so many people, of being the object of curiosity and pity, made Bethany's stomach clench. I don't think so. You can't hide out here forever, Jake said, echoing his earlier accusation. I'm not hiding, she insisted. I go to town regularly. I teach. I attend church. And slip away before anyone can really talk to you. Sit in the back pew. Decline every invitation to socialize. His eyes held hers. That's hiding, Bethany. It was the first time he'd used her given name, and it affected her more than it should have. Perhaps I'm simply private, she countered. Perhaps you're afraid. The accusation stung because it contained a kernel of truth. You presume too much, Mr. Turner. Jake, he corrected. And maybe I do, but I think you're stronger than you give yourself credit for. After he left, Bethany sat by her fire, his words echoing in her mind. Was she hiding? Had she allowed her scars to become not just a physical reality, but a barrier between herself and life? The night of the Harvest Festival arrived crisp and clear, with stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky. Bethany stood in front of her small mirror, examining her reflection. She'd put on her best dress, a dark green wool that complemented her hazel eyes, and arranged her hair more carefully than usual. She almost changed her mind 3 times on the walk to town. The schoolhouse had been transformed for the festival, with lanterns strung across the yard and tables laden with food. A small band played lively tunes, and couples twirled in an open space cleared for dancing. Bethany hesitated at the edge of the gathering, her courage faltering. Then she heard her name called and saw Rebecca Turner, Jake's sister, waving enthusiastically. "You came," Rebecca exclaimed, taking Bethany's hands. "Jake said you might, but I wasn't sure. Come, you must try Mrs. Wilson's apple cake. It's divine." Rebecca's warmth made it impossible to retreat, and Bethany soon found herself surrounded by parents and students, engaged in conversation that had nothing to do with her appearance. If people noticed her scars in the forgiving light of the lanterns, they didn't comment. She was helping serve cider when she felt a presence behind her. Turning, she found Jake watching her, a slight smile on his face. "You decided to come," he said. "Your sister can be very persuasive." His smile widened. "A family trait." "Indeed." Bethany handed him a cup of cider. "Your persistence is either admirable or annoying, depending on one's perspective." "And from your perspective?" She considered him for a moment. "I haven't decided yet." Jake's laugh was rich and genuine. "Fair enough." He nodded toward the dancers. "Would you care to join them?" Bethany's heart skipped a beat at the thought of being held in his arms, even in the formal way of a country dance. "I don't think afraid," he challenged gently. The echo of their earlier conversation wasn't lost on her. "That's unfair. Life often is." He set down his cider and offered his hand. "One dance, Miss Foster. Then you can go back to avoiding me if you wish." "I don't avoid you," she protested, even as she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and strong. "Could have fooled me." The band had started a waltz, slower than their previous tunes. Jake led her to the edge of the dancing area, placing his right hand lightly at her waist while holding her scarred right hand in his left. "I'm not very practiced," Bethany warned. "Just follow my lead," he said quietly. "I won't let you fall." He guided her gently but confidently, maintaining a proper distance between them while making the steps easy to follow. Bethany gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasure of moving to music, of being part of the celebration rather than separate from it. "See? Not so terrible," Jake murmured. "No," she admitted. "Not terrible at all." They had nearly completed a circuit of the dance area when Bethany saw Hank Bradley watching from near the refreshment table, a sneer distorting his flushed face. As Jake turned her, she lost sight of the cattle buyer, but the brief glimpse was enough to remind her of reality. When the music ended, she stepped back quickly. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Turner." Jake frowned at her renewed formality. "Something wrong?" "No, I just—" She glanced toward where Hank had been standing, but the man had moved. "I should help with the desserts." Before Jake could respond, she hurried away, finding refuge behind a table laden with pies and cakes. She busied herself serving slices to a line of eager festival-goers, deliberately avoiding looking for Jake in the crowd. Nearly an hour passed before she allowed herself to relax. Perhaps Hank had left, or perhaps he'd simply lost interest in tormenting her. Either way, the evening had gone better than she'd feared, and a small part of her was grateful to Jake for encouraging her to attend. That gratitude evaporated when she heard raised voices from the darkness beyond the lantern light. One of them was unmistakably Jake's, the other Hank's, both heated with anger. Bethany set down the serving knife and moved toward the sound, anxiety knotting her stomach. She found them at the edge of the schoolyard, squared off like fighters, though neither had yet thrown a punch. "Take it back," Jake was saying, his voice dangerously quiet. Hank swayed slightly, clearly intoxicated. "Why should I? Everyone knows you're only sweet on her out of pity. What other reason could there be? You're drunk, Hank. Go sleep it off before you say something you'll regret, even more than you already do." "Or what? You'll defend her honor?" Hank laughed crudely. "Does she even have any left? Maybe those scars aren't just on the outside. Maybe she's damaged goods." All that Jake's fist connected with Hank's jaw, cutting off his words and sending him stumbling backward. Bethany gasped, the sound drawing both men's attention. "Bethany," Jake said, his expression shifting from anger to concern. "You shouldn't be out here." Hank spat blood onto the ground and straightened, his eyes narrowing as he spotted her. "There's your sweetheart, Turner. Came to watch you fight for her. Touching." "That's enough," Bethany said firmly, stepping forward. "Mr. Bradley, I don't know what grievance you think you have with me, but I assure you, I've done nothing to deserve your cruelty." "Didn't say you deserved it," Hank replied, rubbing his jaw. "Just said it's a fact. No man wants damaged goods." Jake moved as if to strike him again, but Bethany caught his arm. No, he's not worth it. Listen to her. Turner, Hank taunted. She knows I'm right. Bethany released Jake's arm and faced Hank directly. You're wrong, Mr. Bradley. My worth isn't determined by your narrow assessment or anyone else's. Now if you'll excuse us, we're missing the festivities. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding but her steps steady. After a moment, she heard Jake following her. Bethany, wait, he called. She stopped but didn't turn around, not trusting herself to maintain composure if she saw pity in his eyes. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Jake said, coming to stand beside her. As am I. But it's nothing I haven't heard before, or at least seen in people's expressions. He's a fool, Jake said vehemently. Yes, she agreed. But he's not alone in his thinking. They stood in silence for a moment, the sounds of the festival carrying faintly from the schoolyard. I should go home, Bethany said finally. I'll walk you. That's not necessary. Jake's hand touched her arm gently, turning her to face him. Please, let me see you safely home. The sincerity in his face broke through her defenses. All right. They walked in silence, the moonlight illuminating the path. When they reached her cabin, Bethany expected Jake to bid her good night and leave. Instead, he followed her onto the porch. May I come in for a moment? He asked. There's something I need to say. Bethany hesitated, then nodded. Inside, she lit a lamp, its soft glow filling the small room with warmth. She removed her shawl, hanging it carefully by the door, before turning to face Jake. He stood in the center of the room, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. What Hank said about my feelings being based on pity, that's not true. You don't need to explain yourself to me, Bethany said. I think I do. He took a step closer. I admire you, Bethany. Your strength, your intelligence, your kindness with the children. The way you face each day with dignity despite what you've endured. She shook her head, unable to bear his earnest expression. Please don't. Don't what? Tell you the truth. Don't say things you'll regret, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake moved closer still, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. The only thing I regret is not telling you sooner how much I've come to care for you. Bethany turned away, her throat tight with unshed tears. You don't know what you're saying. I know exactly what I'm saying. His voice was gentle but firm. I'm saying I care for you, Bethany Foster. Not out of pity, but out of respect and admiration and something that feels a lot like love. Love. The word caught in her throat. Don't be absurd. You can't love me. Why not? She whirled to face him, gesturing to her scarred face and arm. Look at me, Jake. This is who I am now. This is what any man who loves me would have to accept, to touch, to I see you. He interrupted softly. All of you, not just your scars. Fine words, she said bitterly. But reality is different. No man will willingly bind himself to this. I would, Jake said simply. Bethany laughed, a harsh sound without humor. You think that now, but in time, you'd come to resent me. You don't know that. I do know that. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the fire in the hearth. No man will touch me now. Not with desire, not with love. It's better to accept that than to nurture false hopes. Jake was silent for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. Then, with deliberate care, he placed his hat on the table and crossed the space between them. No man will touch me now, she repeated, her voice breaking. Then I'll hold you gently anyway, Jake whispered, reaching for her with infinite tenderness. His arms encircled her, not demanding, not presuming, just offering comfort and connection. Bethany stood rigid for a moment, then slowly, hesitantly, allowed herself to lean into his embrace. Your scars don't repel me, Bethany, Jake murmured against her hair. They're part of your story, part of what made you the woman you are, the woman I admire and care for. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her cheek, the warmth of his body seeping into her cold soul. It had been so long since anyone had held her, longer still since she'd allowed herself to be vulnerable. I'm afraid, she admitted, her voice muffled against his chest. His arms tightened slightly. Of what? Of believing in this. Of trusting it, only to have it taken away. I can't promise nothing will ever hurt you again, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. But I can promise that I will never willingly cause you pain. That I will stand by you, if you'll let me." Bethany pulled back slightly to look up at him, searching his face for any sign of deception or pity. She found only sincerity and something deeper, something that made her breath catch. "May I?" he asked, his gaze dropping to her lips. She nodded, unable to speak. Jake's kiss was gentle, almost reverential, his lips brushing hers with exquisite care. When he drew back, Bethany saw the question in his eyes and answered it by rising on her toes to kiss him again, more firmly this time. His hands cradled her face, thumbs stroking her cheeks, both the smooth skin and the scarred, with equal tenderness. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I'm not asking for promises," he said quietly. "Just a chance to show you that what I feel is real." Bethany nodded slowly. "A chance," she agreed. "But Jake, it won't be easy. Few things worth having are," he replied with a small smile. "But I'm patient and more stubborn than you might realize." "I'm beginning to understand that," she said, a tentative smile touching her lips. As winter descended on Willow Creek, Bethany found herself opening to possibilities she'd thought forever closed to her. Jake courted her with steady determination, respecting her boundaries while gently encouraging her to dream again. They spent evenings by her fire, reading aloud or simply talking. He told her about his ranch, his plans for expanding, his dreams of someday raising a family. She shared memories of her childhood, her passion for teaching, her gradual journey toward accepting her changed appearance. The townsfolk watched their courtship with varying reactions. Some, like Rebecca and Martha, were openly supportive. Others were skeptical or even disapproving. Hank Bradley had left town, but his poisonous words lingered in the whispers of those inclined toward meanness. Bethany learned to ignore those whispers, drawing strength from Jake's unwavering regard and her growing confidence in the classroom. When the spring thaw came, bringing wildflowers to the hillsides and new calves to Jake's ranch, she realized she had come to love Willow Creek almost as much as she loved Jake himself. On a warm April evening, as they walked along the creek that gave the town its name, Jake stopped beneath a flowering cottonwood tree and took both her hands in his. "I've been patient," he said, his eyes searching hers. "I've given you time and space to be sure of your feelings and mine." Bethany's heart quickened. "You have. And now I'm asking, Bethany Foster, if you'll do me the honor of becoming my wife." She looked up at this man who had seen beyond her scars to the woman beneath, who had held her gently when she thought no one ever would again. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." Jake's smile was radiant as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. "I've been carrying this for weeks, waiting for the right moment." "This is the perfect moment," Bethany said, rising to meet his kiss. They were married in the church on a Sunday in May, with wildflowers decorating the altar and sunlight streaming through the windows. Bethany wore a cream-colored dress that Rebecca had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. As she walked down the aisle toward Jake, she saw not pity or curiosity in the faces of the townsfolk, but genuine happiness for them both. In that moment, she felt truly beautiful, not despite her scars but with them, as part of the whole person she had become. That night, in the bedroom of Jake's ranch house, now their home, Bethany faced her final fear. As Jake gently removed the pins from her hair, she trembled not with dread, but with anticipation. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice a low rumble in the dim room. "A little," she admitted. "It's been a long time since I believed I could be desired." Jake's hands framed her face, his thumbs tracing the line where smooth skin met scarred. "You are the most desirable woman I've ever known," he said. "Not in spite of your scars, but including them. They're part of the woman I love, the brave, stubborn, beautiful woman I'm honored to call my wife." As he kissed her, Bethany let the last of her barriers fall away. In Jake's tender embrace, she found not just acceptance but celebration of all that she was, all that she had endured, all that she had become. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, the words a promise and a gift. "And I love you," he answered. "Every part of you, now and always." In the years that followed, Bethany's fears proved unfounded. Jake's love never wavered, never dimmed, never turned to pity or revulsion. They built a life together on his ranch, raising cattle and children with equal dedication. Bethany continued teaching until their first child was born, a daughter they named Hope. 2 sons followed, then another daughter. Their home became known for its warmth and hospitality, a place where all were welcome regardless of appearance or circumstance. Sometimes, in the quiet evening hours when the children were asleep, and she sat with Jake on their porch watching the sunset paint the western sky, Bethany marveled at the journey that had brought her to this place of peace and belonging. "What are you thinking?" Jake asked on one such evening, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. "I was thinking about that night at the Harvest Festival," she replied, "when you said you'd hold me gently anyway." Jake smiled, the lines at the corners of his eyes deepening. At 42, his dark hair was touched with silver at the temples, but his gaze was as clear and steady as ever. "Best promise I ever made," he said, lifting her hand to press a kiss to her scarred knuckles. "And the easiest to keep." Bethany leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her like the golden light bathing the land they loved. In Jake's gentle embrace, she had found not just healing, but joy, a life richer and more beautiful than she could have imagined on that long-ago day when she first stepped off the train into Willow Creek and a future unknown.